guest. Nina de Gramont is a professor of creative writing at University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She's the author of the acclaimed Meet Me at the River, Every Little Thing in the World, Gossip of the Starlings, The Last September, as well as The Distance from Me to You, which has recently been optioned for a movie. There have been a lot of impressive blurbs written by heavy hitters for the Christie Affair, and the book has been chosen for Reese Witherspoon's book club this month. The Christie Affair is a genuine marvel, Krista Hanna writes. Paula McLean says the Christie Affair is a pitch-perfect hat trick of a novel. I loved every page and will be recommending this to everyone I know. Thank you also, Elizabeth, for being in conversation with Nina tonight. Elizabeth McCracken is the author of 7 books, including The Souvenir Museum, Bowl Away, Thunderstruck and Other, and The Giant's House. Her 8th book, The Hero of This Book, a novel, will be published in October by Echo Books. She currently holds the James Michener Chair for Fiction at the University of Texas at Austin. So without further ado, I'm going to let you two chat it up, and we'll come back on at about 7:45 to take your questions. So enjoy. Thank you.
Hi, Nina.
Hi, Elizabeth.
How are you? It's so nice to see you. Wait, I have to hide my face again, if it will let me. It's the ceremonial thing that I do. No, it's not going to let me. I have to see my face. Before we started, we came online, we were talking about having met, I think, 25 years ago, maybe.
It's got to be in that neighborhood, because it was when David's first book came out, and probably The Giant's House was the book that you were promoting, right?
Yeah,
it would have been like 98
right.
or 97 or something like that. Yeah. And I remember before the event, I was standing in the chairs, and the 3 authors, I was just a writer's wife at the time, the 3 authors were kind of backstage, and somebody came up and said, "Are you Elizabeth McCracken?" And I paused for a moment. It was like one of those, what if I said yes? What would happen? And then I was like, no, I'd be caught so quickly because she's right back there.
It feels like a good transition to this book, the idea of a changed identity, which it's such a wonderful book. It's on the number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list.
Yeah.
It's, for those who haven't had a chance to read it yet, it's full of twists. It has sort of the pleasures of a thriller, but it's also character driven, and it's about large subjects. It's about war and love, and I just loved it.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, it just held me in its grip in every wonderful way. So my question, because it takes a historical event as its seed, what's your relationship to Agatha Christie through life, and then as you started writing the book?
It's kind of a new relationship, honestly. I wasn't somebody who grew up reading her work. I mean, obviously I knew she was, and I had seen the movies based on her books, Murder on the Orient Express, which I was really interested in because I actually grew up, the preschool and elementary school I went to was in Anne Morrow's house that she grew up in. So as a kid, then going to see that movie, it was really fascinating, this kidnapping. I mean, I conflated the 2 houses. Charlie Lindbergh wasn't actually kidnapped from the Englewood house, but so I guess I had some sort of intrinsic attachment to her via that story, but I never read any of her books till after I wrote the first draft of this novel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, what really, and I think that was good. I tried to write a novel about Emily Dickinson, who I was, so entrenched with and knew so much about that I was paralyzed when I went to write it. So I think it was good to approach it, at least at first, when she wasn't precious to me yet. I could kind of feel comfortable making her who I wanted to be on the page.
That's so interesting, because she's, as a character in this book, she's a spectacular character. She's complicated and infuriating and lovable and unpredictable. Did your understanding of her change after you read her books?
Yes, my understanding of her changed through reading her novels and also reading a lot of her nonfiction. She has a big fat autobiography, which was the biggest gift in the world because she loved to talk about little particulars like the household staff and, where things were in the house and all these things that I thought, how am I ever going to figure this out? She just had written it down really carefully. And she also writes about traveling in the Middle East with her second husband, going on archaeological digs. So I learned about her that way. And then when I read her novels, there was a lot I wasn't expecting in terms of narrative brilliance. I mean, her dialogue is incredible, and you can really see the wit that drove her to be a dramatist later. And you can also see, have you read her novels, Elizabeth? Was that a thing?
I burned through them when I was young. In summers, just reading one Agatha Christie after another, but not since then.
It's fun. It's funny to look at it now and to also think about, like, I knew if I was going to use her as a character, I would have to kind of imitate certain stylistic things from her books. And I wasn't expecting to be so daunted by some of them. I mean, she's really amazing at like having a minor character and then one sentence that sort of sums up their whole personality and past. So, I mean, I found it very impressive. And, as I've been doing interviews, people keep asking me what was the most fun part of writing this book. And it's an easy answer because it was really a fun assignment to give myself, is to sit down and read a bunch of her books. It was even more fun than I was expecting it to be.
So what research did you do before beginning the book then, if you stayed away from her books?
I really wanted to write a draft without doing very much research, with just sort of using what little I knew about the time period. So really the research I did beforehand was, what were the books of the day. I was really interested in what was published the year 1926. I mean, I knew right away that I wanted the narrator, who's a fictional version of Agatha Christie's husband's mistress, to have like literary aspirations and be sort of a literary snob. So I really wanted to see what was in the zeitgeist at the time, what she would be reading and aspiring to. And, the geography of England and Ireland and things like that. But apart from that, I really just wanted to do a big mistake-filled draft where I got the story down and then do the nuts and bolts research later.
Well, I'd love to talk about Nan, who's the narrator of the book. And the narration is so interesting and complex. And it feels she wishes she would like to be a writer. She reads, she name checks The Great Gatsby and as you say, the other books of the day with a slight sense of like, those were the real literature, not the stuff that Agatha Christie was writing. But it's a book about storytelling in a way, and her narration goes where it wants to. And I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about her ability as a narrator to go where she wants to.
I think that writing about Agatha Christie, I mean, I'd love that you say that about Nan, because she definitely, at least until we look at the construction of this book and the story she's telling, she's somebody who wasn't a writer, but it's sort of that, I would have been a great proficient if only I had learned to play. Anybody who aspires to do something but hasn't done it, in their minds, they're already these great geniuses and can look down on someone even as accomplished as Agatha Christie. But I do think that there's a tendency to underestimate writers who are women who've written things that are kind of cozy on the face of them, and one of the novels, it's a little bit after this time, it was published in the 30s, but I really love Dodie Smith's Capture the Castle.
Oh, so good.
And that's a novel that people say, oh, it's so, you're in for such a treat. It's my comfort book. And it is all those things, but it's also a really fascinating examination of language and how books are created, and it's so concerned with its own construction. So I was interested in doing something like that and giving Nan this conscious ability to imagine and then narrate things that happened when she weren't present. And I thought it was particularly interesting and kind of painful to think of your husband's mistress and all the things that she would know and all the things that she would think she knew, that sort of unwelcomed intimacy was oogly and also fascinating to explore as a narrator to me.
I mean, she has this strange ability. It's a form of domination because she turns Agatha Christie into a character.
Right.
And she just goes, the narration goes into long periods of what appear to be, she says, but as for me.
Yeah. I think I meant it to be a sort of tricky third person that is always really first person. And I tried to bring her back in. And I've always been interested in that sort of idea of the false limitation of a first person narrator only knowing what she's seen or experienced, because we narrate things in life all the time that we weren't there for. And, you know, the whole idea of solving a murder is putting together pieces that you weren't there to witness. So I was sort of interested in that idea of becoming a witness after the fact and asserting knowledge of things that you weren't present for.
I mean, I definitely read it. I saw that you could read it as being a combination narration, but I just loved thinking that it was all Nan saying,
yeah,
here I am with my lover in my lover's head with his thoughts. Here I am. And for somebody who, she's a really fascinating character, somebody whose agency, and I want to be careful. There are so many twists in this book. It is one of those books that you really do, and I mean this in the best possible way, go, what? Because things shift in ways that that you haven't anticipated, and you see the narrator very consciously holding stuff back and then revealing it. But she's somebody whose agency was taken away in a significant way, and as a narrator, she claims all the agency she can possibly take.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, because one of the things the book is about the effects of the war on people, and equally and unequally on people, and just what research you did and what interested you in writing about the war, World War I.
Yeah, well, the time period, it was interesting writing about the disappearance. And when you approach something because of one specific event, you're tied to historically what was going around in the world the year that it happened. So it wasn't as though I came to it saying, I'm fascinated by the aftermath of the First World War. I'm fascinated by the Irish Revolution or the Spanish flu, or all the things that are sort of stirred up into the pot once you go back in time and look into what was going on in 1926 and the years preceding it. But once I went there, you know, for me, it was like art that I'd been interested previously sort of sifted to the top. And I remembered, for example, I've always loved the Peter Weir film Gallipoli. So I had this sort of artistic memory of that part of World War I. And luckily there were great resources. Peter Jackson has a wonderful documentary called And They Shall Not Grow Old. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just like colorized, sort of modernized shots of actual footage from the First World War. And the overvoice is all soldiers and their remembrances of that time. So I watched that. You know, in the first couple drafts, I've totally forgotten the question. So I'm just rambling about the time period. I know it was something like that. But in a way, the time frame gives you all these gifts, and you become really interested in them. And also, you know, you go and you read Agatha Christie's work, and particularly the novels between the First and Second World War are really poignant and really interesting for the references to the First World War. I mean, there's this one scene in And Then There Were None, where a young man complains to the older men that all old men ever talk about is the war. And little does he know, the Second World War is just around the corner for all the men of his age to experience and either die or bore young men in the future with. So once I started reading her books, I would find things to research and look into. And she writes incredibly movingly about the First World War and its effect on England in her autobiography.
I suddenly realized I was so excited to see you. We said that I was going to ask you to read. Would you read the opening?
Yeah.
I became overcome with excitement at seeing you, that it went right out of my mind.
You know what?
The very opening?
Elizabeth, if you don't mind, there's one paragraph where Nan sort of talks about what we were talking about earlier, that sort of first person, third person that she does.
Yes,
Is it okay if I read that?
Yes, please.
Okay. You may well wonder if you can believe what I tell you about things that occurred when I myself was not present, but this is as reliable an account as you can ever hope to receive. Think for a moment. Don't you know about events that pertain to you, but which you didn't witness? Don't you find yourself sometimes recounting them? There's plenty we remember that we never saw with our own eyes or lived with our own bodies. It's a simple matter of weaving together what we know, what we've been told, and what we imagine, not unlike the way a detective pieces together the answers to a crime.
Oh, it's so good. Did you do a lot of research on getting, because the characters are English and Irish, largely, entirely?
Pretty much, I don't think there's one American.
Yes, I remember the American. Yeah. Did you work hard? Because they sound beautifully English and Irish. I'm getting their voices correct?
Say that again?
Did you what sort of work did you do to get the voices
correct? I did. I read, it was partly immersing myself in novels by English authors at the time. I did watch a lot of Downton Abbey, which the timing is just right. The location is just right. And I would go back to it. Like, for example, when I've been in England and taken a boat to Ireland, we called it the ferry. But I thought, you know, in like 1917, were they calling it a ferry? I don't know. So I went, and then I remembered I could find very little about the early days of that boat. But I remember that there was an episode of Downton Abbey where Sybil and Tom took the boat back and forth. So I watched it to see if they called it the boat or the ferry, and they called it the boat. So that's what I went with. And actually, there's in I Capture the Castle, which is partly about, you know, these English girls meeting these Americans. There's a whole 2-page section where she says, British people say this, American people say that. And also, you know, thank God for the internet. I don't know if I could have written this book in the days before then. I would have been living in the library. And I mean, I don't even know how you discover it, but, you know, if I were unsure of something, I could look it up. And then there was a whole, one of the first people who read it was somebody who worked with my agent, who was British, and he told me, because, you know, I mean, you are an American who's lived in London and Europe, so you probably have all these differences much more at the tip of your fingers than I do. But for example, I had somebody, Nan was walking in the city, and I said she walked a certain number of blocks. And he said, an English person would never say that because European cities aren't built on grids the way American cities are. So I had lots of help, but I'm sure and luckily in the actual English version, I had editors who went through and anglicized everything. So that the English version probably reads much, I know it reads much more authentically than the American does.
I always think in I Capture the Castle, which I tell you, it's such a beautiful book. That's about being an artist
Yes.
and a writer.
Yes.
And they talk about English people liking to get a nice wad of food on their fork, meaning a little bit of everything on the plate, but what it is a wad. And I live with an English person, so I look there, you get a nice wad on your fork. Can you talk a little bit about it related to this book, but just in general? I'd love to hear you talk about your feelings about genre and what categorizing something as a certain genre means and being cross genre, because there's this book which is both, I shouldn't say both, it's literary and it's got aspects of being a thriller or a mystery, and your other books too are often I don't like that both, because it sounds like, oh, it's a push me pull you. It's not that your books are more than one thing at a time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times I think the categories are very artificial, particularly the word literary, which is unavoidable. I use it all the time myself, especially in the classroom, but it seems more like a value judgment than anything else. And I really like to, I like to think about language, but I also like to kind of return to the sort of things that had me up reading with a flashlight when I was a kid, you know, the sort of juicy, intimate, exciting kind of stories that frighten you or fill you with romance. I've started using Benjamin Percy's craft book Thrill Me in the classroom.
I haven't read it yet. I mean, I love this stuff.
It's really good. I think it's really good, particularly, so you and I both teach in MFA programs. And I think sometimes that phase of a writer's life gets a little bit away from the things that they first loved about reading. And that book really exhorts writers not to do that, to pay attention to language and sort of combine all the things they're learning in an MFA with this sort of like, give these people someplace else to go. I studied with Donna Tartt for one piece of a semester, and she's very much somebody who says, you know, your first order of business is to entertain. And when she was teaching us, she would say, the best thing you can do as a reader is to read wildly different authors. You know, read George Eliot and read Tom Robbins, and think of all different kinds of genres and get your feet wet in terms of all of them. And that's the best way to maintain an original voice.
Lucy Sante says in her Paris Review interview, never forget that writing is a branch of show business.
Yes, I love that.
I love, because I think, yeah, the word literary often is sort of feels like the little dead mouse we stroke in our pocket when well, it might not be something else, but it's literary, and
right.
Yeah, it doesn't seem useful to me.
No, it's a way of saying valuable or good. And
but that you give to yourself almost. Well, I'm a literary fiction writer.
Right, exactly.
So I've just pulled up my notes. I normally print them out. Did you find it hard to change facts in the things that you knew had happened? I mean, obviously not, but like, how did you deal with shaping? Because it's about a mystery that not much is known about.
Right. I think I gave myself certain parameters and made decisions about what facts I was going to change. And I think the decision to Archie Christie's actual mistress was named Nancy Neal, and she was from a very middle-class family. As far as I know, she did not have any Irish parents or experience in Ireland. And in my early drafts, I was calling her Nancy Neal. And there was a point where I was changing, so I was making up such a history for her that I thought I might as well just, give this poor real woman a break and create a woman with all these characteristics that I want her to have and put her in Nancy Neal's place, which to me it made it easier to sort of dispense with. I think the only thing I kept about her was her age, and she did have 3 sisters, which seemed like a really important supporting trait for her, to be someone who really bonded with other women. But once I gave myself permission to do that, I decided that I would keep Agatha Christie and her family. Pretty much all the supporting facts are as they were, and adhere to the facts of the day. Most of the details about the search are taken from articles I read. There's a great book by Jared Cade called Agatha Christie and the 11 Missing Days, and he did wonderful research about exactly how the search was conducted and what happened on what days, and all that was really useful. So once I established the parameters, the main thing that I knew I was going to completely make up is what happened in Yorkshire, where Agatha Christie was while she was missing. So I felt okay about that. I felt that was like the only way into the story. I mean, I guess there are there's probably many kinds of historical fiction, but there's the kind of historical fiction that really hews to the facts and is sort of almost an acting out of biography using point of view. And, you're sort of in the story, imagine you see it as it happened. I wanted to do more of an alternate history where I could kind of make up, what if this is what happened?
And it's so full of life, I think, for those decisions, because it doesn't feel, sometimes when you read historical fiction about real people, it's over respectful. And so it feels like a really beautiful puppet made to look like somebody famous. And these characters are all just thrillingly flesh and blood.
Thank you.
Did the chronology of the book is really interesting and intricate. Did you always know that it goes back and forth, but it always takes the reader with it? It never feels, when it shifts, quite thrilling to go back and forth in time and find new things out.
For me, I knew that these 2 time periods were going to interact, and that those were the 2 important pieces of the story. When I first wrote it, the first thing I wrote was Nan's history, just in like a 30-page block. And when I realized that the story should go back and forth between the 2, that was sort of my breakthrough in terms of, oh, this is what the story is. This is how I'm going to tell it, and this is how it needs to be constructed.
Did you think of it as you wrote it as a departure from your other work, or do you think in terms of departures? Or
it was a departure from my work in that I think the thing that was most different was just going to a time period that I didn't know. I'm an American who lives in the 21st century, and I had to think about being an English person who's living early in the 20th century. So that was the biggest departure, and sort of all the work that I had to do to get it to a point where it might have some verisimilitude in terms of the history that was going on around it. So it was a lot more work than what I've done previously.
How many books have you published now?
This is my 9th. If you can, I've done a couple under pseudonyms, so it's either my 7th or my 9th, depending on how honest you want to be.
Well, you wrote those books.
I did.
Why did you choose to write? Why did you choose to publish them underneath a pseudonym?
In both cases, in one, the first time I did it, I wrote a book for Marvel, it was kind of an origin story about Rogue. So I was hired to do it. And I felt like, I mean, I think it says in the bio of that book that it's me. I was sort of modeling it after Judy Blundell, who's a great YA author who writes very literary. She won a National Book Award, but she also writes for it's either Star Wars or Star Trek under a different name. So I was like, oh, I'll be like Judy Blundell and I'll write my Marvel comic book under a different name. And then I was hired to write another book for Penguin. And I just thought, if it's not my idea, if I'm just sort of the gardener and not the seed isn't mine, it's a horrible metaphor, but then I'll write under a different name. And the other book, the name my parents gave me is Marina, and my husband's last name is Gessner. And I've never used his last name, but I used Marina Gessner, which is like sort of kind of a possible name for me in a different life.
When you write under another name, are you aware of that as you write?
With the Marvel book, it was interesting though, because I feel like with the first draft I wrote of that book, I was much more conscious of feeling like if I want to say if I want to have somebody's heart race, that heart's just going to go ahead and race.
Right.
And these phrases that I don't think I would ever use if I were writing under my own name, but I changed most of it when I went back when I finished the draft. So yes and no. I felt a lot less. My heart didn't beat quite as hard when I was going to read reviews and things like that. And it was a pseudonym.
Do you read reviews?
Yes, I'm such an idiot. I do. I've got to stop. I was just reading your buddy Ann Patchett's new book of essays. And I loved, in one of those, she talks about sort of learning not to read reviews or pay attention to reviews. And I wish I could get to that place, but I'm too nosy.
Anne has evolved beyond all of their people. I don't read Goodreads or Amazon, but when people say, oh, I don't read reviews, I'm like, they're talking about you in the newspaper. Of course you got to read it. Even though I know people don't, but it always amazes me to hear.
Yeah. And I have to say, I feel, sort of adage that if you believe the good ones, you have to believe the bad ones. But I feel completely comfortable believing the good ones and disbelieving the bad ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I ask you about writing animals? Because there are two excellent dogs in this book. You wrote a beautiful book featuring many cats. What draws you to, of cats and men? What draws you to write about animals?
I really love them. I spend a lot of time with them generally. I really love I love other people who also love animals. And I think, like any writer, you sort of go to your own fascinations. And to me, it tends to be dogs and cats. And they're great in my daily life. They're a great sort of moment of joy and breaking through the noise. And I think that they can do the same on the page. And in terms of this book, it was a great point of commonality. Agatha Christie also really loved dogs, and the dog in the book is her real beloved Peter. I think she dedicated a book to.
Really? Oh.
She just adored that dog. So it was a great point of commonality with her. And then also there's a character named Finbar, who's this young Irish man. And when I was working to make him a very lovable person, to me, that's one of those characteristics that makes somebody instantly lovable if they really love animals and are good with them.
Yeah, it's actually one of my favorite parts of the book is that he is an exceptionally good trainer of sheepdogs. And there's something, he comes alive in a very particular way because he's so good at training this particularly important sheepdog named Albie.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was just, you know, me making the kind of person I would have fallen in love with when I was 15. I think if there had been some, you know, slightly older boy on the farm next door who was really good at training dogs, that would have done it.
Yeah. Finbar's, yeah. All of the characters in the book are so they're so complex, and the way they move and change through the book is just, it's there are the plot twists, and there's the really affecting way the characters shift with the plot twists. It's, yeah,
Thank you.
it's beautiful.
Thank you.
I think oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think one of the things I took from actual life is the sort of person that Archie Christie seemed to be. And I really wanted to create these sort of anti-Archies, these men who, you know, when Archie was in the war, he was in airplanes, so sort of above the fray. And somebody who, based on what I read, and certainly the version of him I created on the page, was one of those men who doesn't want to interact with other people's messiness. So I really wanted there. And I mean, I think maybe Poirot was Agatha Christie's response to that, because he's so empathetic and so understanding of other people's messiness, to the point of sympathizing with people's motives for committing murder, you know. So I just wanted to write some sweet, messy men.
Yeah, one of the other things that you read about beautifully is, and very subtly, is class. And I had never thought it talks about, it's a class issue, whether you are in a plane flying over the war, whether you're actually down in it in the mud.
Yeah.
We were given a run of show, and as you know, I used to be a librarian, so I'm very interested in getting the timing exactly right.
No, it's so terrific. So terrific. We have plenty of questions, so we'll start with the one that came in first. What book does Nina suggest for a first-time Agatha Christie reader? Would Nina rather have dinner with Agatha or Archie and Nan?
Oh, I think Agatha. I think Agatha for sure. Either my Agatha or the actual Agatha. I think they would be my choices for sure. For Agatha Christie, if you're just starting out, I really think that Murder on the Orient Express is her masterpiece. I know that's a very boring answer, but I think that's the one that not only is really sharp and propulsive, but the solution is really ingenious. And then there were none. One of the things that's interesting about her is she liked to challenge herself. It would have been really easy for her to just stick with the formula, but she tried to write a lot of different things. And there's a novel called Endless Night that she wrote later on that has almost like a Holden Caulfield kind of narrator. It's really interesting to see her sort of adapting to the tone of the day. So I think that's it. Well, maybe it's not one of the sort of classic Agatha Christie books. I definitely recommend reading it. And then her memoir of traveling in the Middle East is called Come Tell Me How You Live. And that's a really beautiful book.
I didn't realize how proficient she was. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. She wrote 66 novels, all these plays, all these short stories, and she was always traveling. I don't understand. Maybe it's because she didn't have the internet. I don't know.
Yeah. What was the first inspiration, scene, question, or image to ignite in your mind? And did that first thought make it into the final draft? I guess I'm interpreting this as, what was the spark for the story? So you can interpret it any way you wish, but.
Right. I think it's something that I can't say aloud without giving the story away. But I just, and I'm not a good secret keeper. So I won't even attempt to, I can't tell you, I'm sorry. You read the book and then contact me via my website.
Okay, I think that seems fair. That seems fair. And speaking of secret keeping, before we went on air today, I did mention that Reese Witherspoon has The Christie Affair as her book club book this month. And I did ask Nina, and I think it's fun to talk about, is how long ago did you know it was going to be Reese's? How did they contact you? Were you surprised? Did you actually get to talk to her? How did the process go down?
No, I do not get to talk to her. My editor called me. It was about 2 months before the book's release date. And she called me, and I was here, I'm at school in my office, and she called me and I screamed and I jumped up and down, and she said, my editor, Jen Enderlin, but you can't tell anybody. And I was like, well, everybody I know just heard me scream. But she, had to promise not to say anything. She said, you can tell your husband, and that's it. And then I did meet with the people from Hello Sunshine, via Zoom. And they were all wonderful, really sweet, to sort of plan out the little whatever pieces they would use in promoting it over the month. So yeah, it was, I will say that it was hard to keep that secret for about a week, and then I got used to keeping it. And then it was very weird to be able to tell people about it once it occurred.
Well, I'm impressed that you kept a secret already when we asked you the first question. So you're obviously pretty good at it. Let's see, what made you decide to make the fictional Nancy Neal, Nan, Irish born? And we talked about this a little bit. Nancy herself was born in Cheshire. Was it to include the details of the young mother's homes that were in Ireland at the time? I mean, so that is, we talked about that a little bit.
That was the original motivation behind giving her that history. Absolutely. And then as I wrote the book too, it really served well to give the book a different landscape to go to, give it sort of more scope and movement, and also have Nan in her past, the sort of transformative place that she went to that ultimately turned on her.
We have Don wondering, for both of you, Elizabeth and Nina, people are always curious about your writing process. So Elizabeth, we haven't heard from you. How about you letting the audience know a little bit about what your process is, even in your book coming up, what's your writing process like? And you're both professors, so that's, I think, doubly interesting. So
totally chaotic. I don't write much during the semester. Nina, I don't know whether you manage to. I pack it into breaks pretty much, and then I work quite chaotically and long hours.
So when you say chaotically, I mean, are you on the computer, or is it just sort of a big brain dump? What do you mean chaotically?
I mean, like I make a feral little nest in my campus office. I eat pistachios and I throw the shells on the floor. I get up very early. I'll get up and go onto campus at 5 in the morning and try not to. My husband, Edward Carey, is also a writer. We're both writers, married to writers. And we have an agreement that if one of us gets up to go and work early in the morning, the other person will not get out of bed and have a conversation until the working person is safely out of the house and on the way to work.
So do you both work at your offices at the universities, or do you have a home office? Or I think it's interesting you actually leave the house to write, Elizabeth. And how about you, Nina?
I write at home. I used to write in bed. I used to write first drafts in bed, and I'd say it was like convalescing, and I couldn't get out of bed till the draft was finished. This book, for whatever reason, I mostly wrote at desks and tables. But yeah, I very seldom write at school. I'm much more likely to be bothered at school than I am at home. And
So
my husband
both wrote you both wrote your books during COVID. So, I mean, we've been asking all our authors what that was like to write during COVID. Did you have more time? Did you, even as professors, were you doing all your work online? I mean, you're still teaching your classes. It wasn't like you would stop going to work.
Did you write the whole book during COVID?
I
No?
didn't. I actually, I sold the book, sold to St. Martin's the end of February. So I revised it. I worked with Jen on edits during COVID, but the book was written pre-COVID.
Oh, okay.
So I haven't written anything new apart from short pieces since the pandemic. Have you been writing, Elizabeth?
I wrote a chunk of the book that's coming out before the world shut down, but then I worked on it a lot. I also wrote like another short novel, this sort of like the first pancake that you throw out. I didn't write it all until the fall when I was on leave. So all summer long when we were just in the house, I didn't write anything. And then I had to leave, and I understood that this is the only way I get any writing done. I understood what my self-loathing would look like if I didn't get anything done during a leave, no matter what. And that's lifelong motivation. So I wrote two things, and there's something in the book, the second book, but I haven't figured out what it is yet exactly.
Well, that's a great segue, because the same person asked of each of you, what's next for both of you?
Elizabeth has more concrete answs. I don't know. I
know that's a lot of pressure, but everybody wants to know what's next.
I don't know. Elizabeth has a novel coming out.
I have a little novel coming out. Yeah.
Can you give us a little teaser about?
This sounds so evasive, and I mean it to be. It's sort of a novel about memoir. Just my very evasive answer.
It definitely is.
It's about a mother and daughter.
That sounds wonderful, because I love your memoir and I love your novels so much. And I have to say, I used that article that you wrote about the difference between a short story and a novel. Since you wrote that article, I don't think I've had a class where I haven't assigned it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The grab title is I'm an award-winning short story writer, and I don't know the difference, which I imagine was not your original title.
No, but electric literature was nice enough to, is it electric literature?
Mm-hmm.
I think so, yeah. I'd say, be very like me to praise a place and have it wrong, but they're so lovely. They're allowed to call a piece whatever they want it to.
Yes. Well, it's a brilliant article, and so helpful.
So one of the questions that everybody wants to know is, and since you're both teachers, first of all, what do you impart to your students? What's your style? How do you inspire new readers? And also the second part of that question is, what are you reading? What are your favorite books? What are the hot books on your bedside table? What are the books that are maybe not new, but some of your favorites? And we'll also include, just so our audience knows, we will include those as well in the chat and links. So there'll be easy ways for our audience members to buy them through RJ's. So Nina, you want to start?
Sure. Well, like I was saying to Elizabeth, I've been on an Anne Patchett kick. I just finally read The Dutch House, which is one of those novels that makes me wish that I were just a reader and not a writer, because as a writer, her work I think is so intimidatingly brilliant. And then I read her essay collection, These Precious Days, which is just like balm for a writer. And then I also read a novel that I loved called Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau, which was just delightful. It made me really happy. It was really beautifully done.
during the semester, I don't generally get a lot of published work read, but this year I've been doing a million events for people, being the interlocutor. So this book, if you didn't know, it's really excellent. So is this book, The Family Chow, by Lan Samantha Chang. I have this book, which is a finalist for the Story Prize, 5 Tuesdays in Winter by Lily King. I'm doing an event with Sarah Manguso tomorrow for Very Cold People, which is an astonishing book.
Oh, that's supposed to be incredible.
It is incredible.
She's brilliant.
Mouth to Mouth by Antoine Wilson is incredible. Yeah. I'm doing an event with my friend Deb Olin Unferth next week for Barn 8, which is, I think it was one of the last thing I did before the world shut down was an in-person event with Deb for Barn 8. So it looms very large in my mind.
All the virtual events have lent themselves to having, I think every event we've had actually the past 2 years has been having an author in conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. And how do you feel? I mean, you wouldn't if you were at RJ's, Nina, tonight. You'd be up there on the podium by yourself. Is there something? Is there one way you prefer? I mean, I just think this is so wonderful and inviting and thought-provoking to do it this way. So,
I mean, what could be better than getting to? I mean, the only thing that could be better than being interviewed by Elizabeth is if we could go have a martini afterwards. So.
My big complaint is I look much taller than Nina in this format. And in fact, we're both short people.
That's right.
It's inaccurate.
Well, you guys seem to have a wonderful rapport. It's been wonderful tonight. The book is incredible. I also read it, and Reese also she read it in one sitting. It's hard not to, because it really pulls you in and you're not sure. And I think the question, Elizabeth, about genre is perfect, because you're not sure if it's a myth. You're hungry to read it. You really are. It's just, and it's kind of a page turner that it's not like a woman in the window kind of page turner, but you really wonder, sort of, you're on this journey, and it's incredible. So congratulations to both of you for your new books, and thank you for sharing your time with us tonight. Good luck to both of you, and come see us at RJ's at some point.
It's been a joy. Congratulations.
Thanks so much, Patty.
It's so nice to see you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth. So good to see you too. You too. Say hi, Edward.
I will say hi to David. Bye-bye.